Live Fit Podcast, episode 127, Remembering Ryan Correy.
Welcome to the Live Fit Podcast with Glenn Johnson, your resource for all things that contribute to good health. You will hear expert advice and interviews with leading authorities on fitness, food, fat loss, mindset, and the mind-body connection. You will find show notes, articles, and health programs at livefitpodcast.com.
Hey there, everybody. This is Glenn, and today's going to be a little bit different kind of show for you all. For me, I'm not. I haven't done really any preparation for this show, and it's not going to be nearly as polished as the others are. Not that those are super slick, but I'm just talking off the cuff right now. And the reason being is because a friend of mine died recently. His name is Ryan Correy, and I've known this guy since I met him doing the race across Oregon in 2007. You know, we've stayed in touch. We haven't been super close friends, but I've been following his adventures, and we've been in contact back and forth. He was on the Live Fit podcast back in episode 51. And he shared with us at the time the release of his book, A Purpose Ridden, and all of his adventures, or at least most of his adventures, he's been through in his life and since the last time I had seen him. When I first met Ryan, I came upon him on the second day of the 500-mile nonstop race across Oregon. We were in Eastern Oregon, and shortly after dawn, I could see another rider off in the distance up ahead of me, and it took half the day to catch up to him. And we did this little leapfrog thing where I'd pass him, then he'd catch me, and then we'd chat for a little bit, then he'd pull up front, and then I'd finally catch him. We'd chat for a little bit, then I'd pull up ahead, and we kept doing that. And we took these little snatches of conversations for, a few minutes at a time, swapping stories, and we had some similar adventures and ideas and thoughts. But basically, I really enjoyed talking to the guy. He was one of those types of people that is fun-loving, and I can't imagine anybody not liking him. He's one of those guys. One of the things that impressed me was when he was 13, he and his dad went on manhood training, which was a bike ride across the country of Canada from coast to coast. Then later on, several years later, he rode the Pan American Trail or highway, Pan American Highway from Prudhoe Bay, the top of Alaska, all the way down to the bottom tip of Argentina. Was it like 130 days, I'm pretty sure is what it was. And I was familiar with part of the road because I rode my bike from Fairbanks, Alaska down to almost Los Angeles, California. So what's that, like a quarter, an eighth of the distance he rode? And I did it in about half the time. So yeah, he was pretty much smoking me if we were riding side by side. He went on to ride the Tour Divide a couple of times. This is a nonstop, I'm not going to say nonstop, you're on your own. It's an unsanctioned, unofficial mountain bike race from Canada to Mexico via the Continental Divide, all on dirt roads, 100% self-supported. I'm going to play some clips from my previous interview with Ryan from episode 51, and he's going to share some of the little nuggets, the tidbits of his experiences that I'm discussing right now. But one of the most fun things was the year after I met him, he was in the race across Oregon. Now, we both qualified for that race on the race across Oregon in 2007 that I mentioned, and I didn't really want to do RAAM, but he did, and I was down there in Oceanside, California in the summer of 2008 and wished him a good farewell and tracked him on the RAAM website as he rode his bicycle all the way across the country, about 400 miles a day, snatching up a little bit of sleep here and there whenever he could. It took him just under 12 days. 12 days was the cutoff. He made it by about 3 or 4 hours. And even if he didn't make the cutoff, it still would have been a magnificent feat. And he was totally happy with that. He didn't win, but that's okay, because honestly, everybody who finishes that race is a winner. It is amazingly difficult. It's 3,000, maybe 200 miles, something like that. One of the most amazing ones, in addition to that, was, well, there's been several. Let me get back to that one in a second. He attempted a world record stationary bike record, a Guinness Book of World Records attempt on a stationary bike. He made it 6 days and 20 hours. He needed to go another day and 4 hours or something like that to beat the record. And he was a wreck afterwards. You wouldn't think that a stationary bike inside a building with climate control and crew standing next to you, helping you out at everything you wanted, would be so difficult. But his body was physically messed up. His feet were numb for like 6 months afterwards. He was having symptoms that are similar to adrenal fatigue. He had a harder time recovering from that stationary bike ride for 6 days than he did the 12 days on a bike riding across the U.S. over mountains in the wind and the heat, all the weather and all that. So you never can tell where the biggest challenges will come from. Now, last June of 2017, Ryan started experiencing some pain in his abdomen. And the real interesting thing is that it intensified really dramatically when he consumed some sugar. And he's not a big sugar drinker, but he would drink Gatorade and some other sports drinks and things like that, maybe some fruit juice. And whenever he did, the pain was unbearable. He had to lay down and curled up in the fetal position. He went to the doctor several times, had some tests. In July, he did a race called the 24 Hours of Adrenaline. It's a mountain bike race. He did it solo, 24 hours. He won the thing, okay? He won this race, only to find out that he had stage 4 colon and liver cancer. Shortly after the race finished, he found out he had cancer. That's what the pain he was feeling. Now, what's so striking about these, the pain in his abdomen flaring up when he consumed sugar, was that tumors love sugar. That's what they eat. They eat sugar, glucose, carbohydrates. They fiend for it, and they flare up like a big monster when you give it to them because they want more, much like a child. So he went through a lot of testing and eventually 6 or 7 rounds of chemotherapy, and it was working at first, and it just stopped working, and the cancer was much too aggressive, and he finally succumbed to the cancer 9 months later, and he died about a week ago on April 29th of 2018. My wife and I were at Disney World having a little working vacation, and I got the message, and it really put a pallor over the day. It really put a pallor over the day, and it was really hard to, smile and have fun and all that. But the day was definitely colored for me, and way, way, way more so for those that were around him. His wife, Sarah, of 1 year. They were married 1 year. And she was his nurse, his caregiver, all those things that he needed help with, not to mention running the household and their jobs. I don't know how much they could be working during all this, but money still had to come in. So it's just heartbreaking when I think of the fact that they were only married for a year, and here they both met that special someone in their life that they were looking for, and it didn't last as long as you would really hope. Of course, his parents, his sister, his close friends, other relatives, it's heartbreaking. But I will say that my wife said something pretty profound, and it was that even though he was only 35, he crammed a lot into those 35 years. He did a lot to help people out. he did a lot to help people out. He inspired people, for one. He wrote a couple of books. A Purpose Ridden was his first book. I had him on my show on episode 51. He talked about that and many other things. He has a new book that has not come out yet. It's about bike packing in Canada. He rode around the United States to raise money for cancer back in 2002. And his ride down the Pan American Highway was to raise money for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. He's done many more than that. These are the two things that are on the top of my mind right now. And like I said, I'm sorry this is not a really polished, rehearsed podcast. This is just something I had to get out there and share with anybody who's interested in my experience, my relationship with Ryan. I had a lot of trouble even doing this podcast because I sat down and took some notes and tried to write out a semi-script or bullet points or something, and then I just sat there and stared. So my wife said, just get on and start talking, see what happens. If you don't end up using it, so be it. At least I'm getting it out. And everybody, I'm going to put this out, as you well know, because you're listening to it. And I hope you understand where this is coming from. I don't know if I can be at his celebration of life. I, am really upset that he had to go, because like I said, he's one of those guys that you can't help but like. He's one of those guys that's doing a lot of good in the world, and he left the place better than he found it, and that is really all we can ask of anybody. I'm going to play some clips from the interview I did with Ryan back in 2015 in episode 51. This first one is him discussing his book, A Purpose Ridden.
My job to say that it's not a cycling story, but a story told on the back of a bike, because I don't really get into a lot of technical things about bicycle racing or, doing these big events. It's just kind of the lessons learned along the way.
Right.
But one of the big things that I hadn't mentioned yet was the father and son element. So my father, the book starts with my father kind of pushing me into doing a trip with him across the country at age 13. And at the time he called it manhood training. And, this was a chance for me to see the country and kind of open my eyes to adventure and travel and interacting with the world. As the years have gone by since, I really feel for younger generations that are getting sucked more and more to social networks that are all about networking, but are pretty much the exact opposite. You lose the real interactions with people. So here I am at 13 going across the country with my father, and kind of here's my first introduction into this journey of this whole book about manhood. And, we're having to ask strangers for directions, for meals, for places to stay, and, getting across the country and really opening my eyes to how big the place can be, but in small increments, big things, those big, hairy, ambitious goals can be chipped away at.
Yeah.
And I really got sucked into the idea of, for a little while there, of the bigger and better idea. So, it started with the trip around North America to raise $1 million for charity, and pretty well got laughed at. But, then doing Alaska to Argentina, so the longest road in the world, the Pan American Highway.
Wow.
And bringing that story full circle with the race across America. And interestingly enough, my father and I had seen the race across America on TV when we were going across the country that first year. And it was one of those things that was kind of just unique to watch because it looked like a train wreck. You'd never want to do it, but you couldn't look away. You wondered how these people with neck braces or riding across the country at all hours and still managing to stay upright and
Yeah.
watching grown men cry. And now all of a sudden it seemed within the realm of possibility, and having my father come back to be the crew chief and be a part of that journey. And then breaking out to do my own solo endeavors, including the Tour Divide and that sort of thing. So the father-son element is probably the most important part of the story to me, and I think it's something that a lot of fathers and sons will be able to relate to also. I'm pretty open with the lessons that my father taught me. The fights that we had along the way, and things that were not always easy to write about. And the book took longer to write just because my father and I actually had a falling out for a while, because he couldn't believe that I was writing about him in such a way, but I was trying to be honest to the story and how I remembered it. And now he just actually finished reading it the other day. So I think, to me, it's a story for fathers and sons.
Wow.
But cyclists too will also appreciate it.
As I said, Ryan was a great guy, but he really does owe a lot of that to his father. To what amount, I can't possibly say, but he does give his father quite a lot of credit for that manhood training that started at age 13 and continued on.
Yeah, so like the point of the book in my eyes is that my father was very tough on me. Like at no point was he trying to be my friend per se, but more like a parent or a leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't always create the greatest relationship, but as a 32-year-old man now, I look back and I can say, yeah, he's a hard ass here and there, but like look where I am now. I'm following my passion. I stuck with cycling. I like to believe I'm a moral person with strong beliefs, and a lot of that comes from my father. And I look around at a lot of people I know, and I wouldn't say they necessarily have that same foundation. So I say, that's the biggest takeaway from the book for me, is that in the end, that I appreciate what he did for me.
And then we talk about his world record and his world record attempt.
Yeah, I've had a few. I've unofficially held a record for cycling from Alaska, Argentina. So that's a time record. The record at the time was 140 days. I did it in 131.
Wow.
I won't tell you where that one went, but I will say that I describe it in great detail in the book.
Okay.
And then the other one that I did, I've kind of always had this hankering for a world record. I don't exactly know where that comes from, but I'd like to think everyone is sort of the best at something. And It's not necessarily me trying to prove that I'm the best to everyone else, but it's kind of to myself saying, this is my niche. I finally found it. Mm-hmm. And I was teaching spin classes at a gym for 3 years that I was managing. And at the end of one of my mountain bike seasons, I thought, hey, I might take on this stationary spinning world record that I'd heard about. And it was for consecutive amount of time spent spinning.
Wow.
And the record at the time was 8 days, 8 hours. And the rule was you had to always be pedaling. You had to ride 12 miles in an hour, which is not incredibly fast or far, but
right.
As the days mount, it gets to be challenging.
It fell fast.
And and then every hour you got 5 minutes off the bike that you could use right then and there, or bank. So if you ever wanted to sleep for any amount of time, you can imagine the amount of hours you'd have to log before you could, just do 20 minutes, for example.
Holy
which was
cow.
my average. My average sleep bike was 20. We've actually found that 30 was too long.
Oh, really?
So I got to, I'm trying to remember what it was now. It was like 6 days, 20-something hours. And essentially what happened was I was hallucinating so bad. I didn't know who I was. what I was doing. I felt very threatened. I couldn't understand why the crew was keeping me on the bike, or they couldn't justify it to me in a way that made sense to me. And essentially they couldn't keep me on the bike, and I missed out on the records by not too much at that point. And that was 2010, and my feet have not recovered since then. I incurred a lot of nerve damage from my hips down, essentially. But that is, for the most part, come back. It's my feet that have kind of stayed messed up from that.
So you rode across the country 3,000 miles in just a shy of 12 days. And then you spent, 6 days on a stationary bike and screwed up your body?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like I did RAAM, and here I am thinking, I get to do it inside, essentially. Mm-hmm. Protected from the elements, fully controlled environment, air conditioning, support crew right there. You can have a TV set up. There were some things that kind of felt violating at times. Like you had to have witnesses watching you basically 24 hours a day. It was all broadcast online with multiple cameras. So, if I picked my nose, basically,
everyone saw.
100 people watching at any time saw it. That's, out of all the things that I've done, that one has messed me up the most.
Ryan said that he rode from Prudhoe Bay, Alaska to the bottom of Argentina in 131 days. That is about 15,500 miles. And if you're curious on the mileage per day he had to do to pull that off, it was 115 miles per day for 131 consecutive days. His true mileage may have varied, a little more some days, a little less others, but that's the average right there. I really don't know what else I can say. I am so sad that Ryan has left this world. I'm glad I met him. I'm glad he came. He made this place a better place for a while. He has a legacy with a couple of books, and of course, all of his friends, loved ones, everybody he's touched can probably have a warm part of their heart directed at him. So my condolences go out to Sarah, his family, and everybody else who knew him at least as well as me, and even more. So sorry to lose you, Ryan. It was good to know you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Fit Podcast. Please subscribe and share with someone you care about. Read show notes, articles, resources, and learn more about our weight management programs at livefitpodcast.com. Once again, thanks for listening, and always remember to live fit.